it so that the amount of material above the bud is kind of too large. Okay, this ends up being a much larger wound in terms of surface area. Okay, this one here is kind of the opposite. The angle's too low, which gives you a smaller wound in terms of surface area, but the injury is so darn close to that bud that chances are that bud won't survive. Okay, the angle is a little too slight. Okay? It's not at that 45-degree angle, and the amount of material above that bud is just too much. So what'll tend to happen is you'll see that like here the material will survive, okay, but above that there's not quite enough meristematic tissue in here or undifferentiated cells for this to actually close itself or heal its wound. So what the plant will do is it'll say, oh, geez, like this was the spot you were supposed to cut me, i.e. right here. And so it will allow this bark material, you'll see like the epidermis kind of dry out and desiccate. You'll see live epidermis here. And then very slowly, that live epidermis that is really, right, we'll call it the bark in this case, it's really the outside of that is the bark or the epidermis. Just inside of that is the cork cambium layer. Okay, that cork cambium layer is a really interesting layer because it's a layer that it's either producing bark cells or cork cells to the outside of the plant, and it's creating phloem cells to the inside of the plant. But it's a very thin layer of undifferentiated plant cells that can become one or another thing. But in this case, what it would do is it would start to become all cork cells, and it will slowly try to come up and cover up what is going to be dead up here. And it's going to take it a really long time to do it. So that's why this angle is so important. Okay, so this is on an opposite. I didn't get that right. This is on an opposite arrangement plant. Okay, so you got buds opposite each other at the node, and this is actually a good cut. Try to throw a little angle onto it. It's about 1/4 inch above these buds, and this should heal quite nicely. And then also think about, excuse me, the direction of the new bud, which direction it will go, right? So here you see that this is actually a pretty good cut, right? It might be a little bit high. It's at pretty much the angle that you'd want that to be at. But what ends up happening is this water falls onto this or collects on this, and as it beads up, it will roll off into this bud, which will probably kill the bud, right? And so as an alternate, you want to make sure that you're cutting it so that that water rolls away from the bud, okay? Here, the cut was made too close to the bud, so chances are this bud's going to die, and this whole section would probably die, and then the next bud down is going to try to come up and try to compartmentalize that, which is going to take the plant a really long time. So we want to just be mindful. If we all like plants, and I think that again, if you're in this class, you like plants. So, excuse me. So, treat them nicely as you take samples of them. Okay. Resources. Okay. So as we go through this in all of my plant lists, you're going to find the plant botanical name, the pronunciation of that botanical name, the common name, and the family name, as well as the WUCOLS listing for the Sacramento region. If you're taking this class and you don't live in the Sacramento region, then just take it for what it's worth. You're gonna have to do that little bit of extra work to understand how that plant uses water in your region. But we're in Sacramento, so I'm not gonna create a whole list with every. Maybe I should at some point. Anyways, different story. I'm not gonna do it. So I include botanical, pronunciation, common, family, and WUCOLS listing. The way that I find that information is through these resources. And as we go through all of the lists, I also have additional information that I provide about what the botanical name means, occasionally some traits about the family. I'm also going to include size characteristics of the plant, whether it likes full sun, partial sun, morning sun, afternoon sun, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of other information about the plant itself that's not included in the list itself. So this is your opportunity to learn about these plants. Okay, so that's what I do in the lab. I go through all that information. The reality of it is I know a lot of plants, but I don't know every plant, and I can't memorize absolutely everything about every single plant. So I use resources, just as you should, unless you have that brain that can just memorize everything, and good for you, right? And I hope that you never have to utilize these resources. But in general, it's tough to pack that much into one brain. So this resource is Oregon State University's Department of Horticulture landscape plants, and they have a great page here. And this really, I think every plant that's on here is actually located on campus, and I'm pretty sure that this is the one at the OSU in Corvallis, the Beavers. I think the Beavers. Maybe they're the Ducks. No, they're the Beavers. Anyways, I'm not much of a sports guy, but so this is a resource that I use really extensively, and it is a very helpful resource. There is a lot of information in there. Not all plants are on there. Okay, so it's relatively limited, but they have an outrageous amount of plants on here. Great spot for you to go to and be able to dive into more information about these plants. And you will see that I use information from this site in my presentations. Another excellent resource, and there's more resources out there, not just these ones that I'm sharing, but North Carolina State University's Extension Program. Here's the web link. This is a wonderful resource. Obviously, not all plants will be on here because not all plants that thrive in Sacramento or California do the same in North Carolina. But many plants that we look at are shared. Okay, well, they're not shared, but they can be used in both places, which is pretty fascinating. Excuse me. Um, so so I use this as a resource, and this also has really good information on it, and a lot of good information about the plant name itself, what the botanical name means, etc. So this is another resource that I use, and also with many of the plants, there's a quick like YouTube video about the plant too. So if you want to kind of dive into it, then this is a good spot for you to go. And I use this one professionally as well as the Oregon State. And frankly, most of these resources I use professionally. I do projects primarily in the Greater Sacramento area, the Bay Area, and the Greater Bay Area. And then I have a couple outliers throughout the United States as well. And so projects that I design. And so I use these resources, right? If there's an area that I'm not outrageously familiar with, then I use every resource that I can find to make sure that the plants that I'm choosing for these landscapes are going to really thrive there. And frankly, it's just kind of fun to dig into these plants. The last project I had out of state, I'm still working on it, but I did the planting on it. It's in Central Florida. And surprisingly, a lot of plants from California do incredibly well there. And then I also learned some really interesting stuff like Cephalanthus, buttonbrush. I'm pretty sure it's Cephalanthus. A buttonbrush, which is like I thought that it was